During a weekend family dinner, my stepmother slammed her fork onto the table, turned toward me, and shouted, "Either you give your room to your younger brother, or pack your bags and get out." She didn't whisper it. She shouted it in the middle of a dinner I'd helped pay for, in a home my late parents had spent their lives building. Valerie glared at me with an entitled little smirk while her son sat beside her, grinning like he'd already won. My father's memory had been slowly erased from those walls and replaced with their greed. No one at that table defended me. No one said a word. "I'll go pack my bags." They thought they were putting me out onto the street. What they didn't know was that while they'd been busy playing masters of my house, I was already holding the keys to my own freedom and a legal surprise that was about to shatter their comfortable little world. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. 3 days later, I was standing in a brand new home on a quiet hillside. They were about to receive the wake-up call of their lives. The cold night fog of Portland wrapped around my car as I drove away from the old house, rain turning to a steady drizzle against the windshield. I checked into a boutique hotel downtown and carried my 2 suitcases upstairs without looking back. Once that oak door clicked shut behind me, the suffocating noise of Valerie's greed finally went quiet. I sat on the edge of the bed, opened my laptop, and did the thing that had always steadied me in chaos. I looked at the numbers. Unlike people, numbers don't lie. My high-yield savings account showed $212,000, money I'd built dollar by dollar while quietly carrying that house on my own since my father died. Property taxes, roof repairs, every utility bill. Valerie and her son had lived there rent-free the entire time. I'd told myself that honoring my father meant preserving the family home. That dinner made it clear I'd only been funding my own disrespect. I closed the banking app and opened a text my best friend, Antoinette Stevenson, had sent me the week before. She was a real estate consultant who'd been telling me for months to stop bankrolling people who saw me as nothing but a bank account. Attached was a listing for a 2-story cottage in the hills of West Hills for $180,000, cedar decks, floor-to-ceiling windows, a view straight down into the valley. I'd waved it off at the time. Under the dim lamp of that hotel room, it looked like a sanctuary calling my name. With $212,000 in liquid savings, a 40% down payment of $192,000 after the wire transfer and the final signatures, the agent handed me a set of brass keys with a quiet congratulations. I walked into the living room, sunlight pouring across the hardwood, stepped out onto the deck, and listened to the wind moving through the trees. For the first time since my father died, I felt safe in a space that belonged entirely to me. That afternoon I met with my estate attorney, Arthur Pendleton, in his quiet, book-lined office. I handed him the original deed to my family home along with my father's death certificate and explained how Valerie had installed herself as sole ruler of a house she'd never owned, then demanded I pack up and leave my own bedroom. Arthur pulled up the land records and the state succession statutes, then leaned back with the look of a man who already knew the answer. Because my father had died without a separate will, Oregon's intestate succession laws meant the house, originally purchased by my biological parents, long before his second marriage, legally belonged jointly to his descendants and his spouse. My share came to 50%. At the property's current appraised value of $500,000, that was $250,000 that was mine, free and clear. Valerie had no authority to evict me from anything. She never had. Hearing the exact numbers confirmed it. My years of quiet patience had handed her a false sense of... For days after I moved in, my phone started buzzing with demands. Valerie sent a shopping list, steaks, imported wine, a custom cake for Gavin's birthday party, and told me to transfer $200 for groceries. Same entitled tone as always, like I still owed rent on a life I'd never asked to fund. I typed back that if they wanted a lavish party, they could pay for it themselves. Then I opened my banking app and remembered something I'd forgotten in the chaos of moving. Valerie and Gavin were still authorized users on my credit card, added during my father's final months for emergencies. They'd been quietly charging their own luxuries to it ever since. I revoked their access and canceled both cards on the spot. Within the hour, Gavin called, furious, standing at a grocery checkout with a declined card and a line of people behind him. I let him finish yelling before telling him, calmly, that there was no glitch. My sponsorship of his lifestyle was over. I ended the call mid-tirade. Valerie called minutes later, voice shaking with rage, accusing me of humiliating the family and threatening to call the police for abandoning the property. Reading it, Valerie watched the fiction she'd built around herself collapse in real time. She had no steady income, no credit, and Gavin, with no income of his own and academic troubles on top of it, couldn't help. Without my salary quietly propping up the taxes and the upkeep, the house was never something she could hold onto alone. Panic replaced her arrogance fast. She called and texted for hours, her fury turning to tears, framing everything as an unfortunate family misunderstanding, and insisting Gavin would happily take a smaller room if we could just talk. I let her voicemails play out on my porch, listening to the rain over the trees, and felt nothing close to guilt. By Friday, she was begging for a face-to-face. I agreed to meet the next morning at a public coffee shop with my attorney present because this was no longer an informal conversation. Saturday morning, Valerie launched straight into performance mode across the table, dabbing her eyes and loudly calling me an ungrateful daughter, throwing her grieving stepmother onto the street. A few nearby tables turned to look. Arthur was unbothered. He unzipped his briefcase and laid out the land title, the appraisal, and years of bank statements showing exactly who had financed that house. Her tears dissolved into silence. Before she could recover, I slid one more document across the table, toward Gavin. A lease cancellation notice for the sedan he'd been driving for 2 years, registered, and paid entirely through my account. He went pale, insisting he needed it for his commute, and that I had no right to take it. I told him the car belonged to my credit, not his, and asked for the keys. His hand shook as he dropped them on the table. 3 weeks later, the house sold at its full appraised value of $500,000. 3 months later, I sat on my cedar deck with Antoinette, coffee in hand, morning mist burning off the valley below. She smiled and said I looked completely different since taking control of my own life, and she wasn't wrong. Stepping away from that house and the people who'd tried to make me disappear inside it had been the single most freeing decision I'd ever made. Arthur sent one last update that week. Gavin had dropped out of school when the money stopped, and, stripped of my father's house, they were left with exactly what they'd earned. And up on that hill, in the home I'd bought with money nobody ever gave me permission to keep, I finally had what they never let me have at that dinner table, a room that was actually mine.